As usual, we'll start with the discussion about the upcoming council meeting agenda for 26 October. And we're going to go down, of course, the prayer and pledge and the agenda, acceptance of the agenda. Does anybody have any comments about the acceptance of the agenda?
No, looks good. No.
Okay.
Mine's not coming up.
Then we do awards and presentations. We'll have a proclamation for Empty Bowls, which is coming up. Then we have Business of the Month, and it's going to be Bob Blanchard's is nominated Ace Hardware for the Business of the Month for October.
Can I ask, who has December? Is it me?
Good question.
Oh, thank you very much.
Who handles that? Is it one of the,
You do, Mr. Mayor. I'll have to go back and look.
Just, if you'll just let me know, that's fine.
We'll do.
Don't need to know right this
So we're
minute.
not meeting though.
well, we'll meet in November and December both.
Just one meeting.
Or just one meeting, so we got to do it the first week, yeah. Unless we need to have a special meeting, but again, we wouldn't do that type of thing at a special meeting. Okay, city manager's report, public hearing items. First is the finding of necessity for a redevelopment area, and I'm going to ask Matt to talk about it for a minute. But the way this is going to work is I'll open the meeting. We'll have Matt give his briefing. I'll open the meeting to the public, close the meeting to the public, and then bring it to discussion for council. And once the council discussion is over with, if there's no additional guidance for Matt, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item. So Matt, you want to talk about item number 2?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, the approval process for establishing a proposed redevelopment area requires the city to first hold a public meeting to discuss the findings of necessity that are contained in the draft report provided to you in the agenda backup material. No action by councils are scheduled for Thursday. It's simply an opportunity for the public to comment on the draft before it's finalized. As required by state law, all property owners have been notified, and I followed up by phone last week and was able to speak with most of the owners. The proposed boundary encompasses 23 acres along Fry Boulevard between North Garden Avenue and Carmichael. There are 19 tax parcels with 12 owners in the boundary area. It's within the oldest part of town. The average building was constructed over a half-century ago. The assessed values have declined by about 5% compared to the remainder of the general commercial properties in the city, which have experienced an increase of 8.1%. The area developed prior to modern building code and site development codes being instituted. The general character of the area exhibits signs of site deterioration, absence of landscaping, non-conforming signage, a lack of on-site stormwater facilities to control drainage. The Knights Inn has ceased operations, and there are several buildings that possess vacancies. The parcelization of the area is oddly configured, with some lots being without any public street access. Some of the parking areas located in the front of the buildings depend on the public right-of-way for drive aisle access. The pedestrian experience along Fry Boulevard is uncomfortable with the back of the curb adjoining the roadway. In summary, the existing conditions need to be upgraded for the area to remain viable into the future. The West End Partnership Program, coupled with the public investment slated for Fry Boulevard over the next couple of years, will be a good start. The owners are generally interested in taking advantage of the grant program possibilities. So if everything goes as planned, the formal resolution establishing the area will be placed on your November 9th agenda. Staff will then begin drafting the redevelopment plan for the Planning and Zoning Commission consideration on January 16th and council consideration on February 8th of next year. By that time, we should have the West End Partnership Program finalized and ready to start taking applications soon thereafter. And that's my summary.
Okay, and I before we open it up for council questions, this is just for the public hearing and get feedback from the public.
No action is scheduled.
No action is scheduled. But again, I would just tell everybody that when I read through this, I didn't see the meat, and what I mean by the meat is what the people that are going to apply for the funding are going to want to know. They're going to know when they need to file, how they file, all who, when, where, why, how much, all those questions.
Yeah.
And that meat is not here yet, and we're not to that point. That's my understanding.
And I've been conveying that through my one-on-one conversations with the property owners in terms of the anticipated schedule for the grant program, what the program entails, and when we hope to get that off the ground. Okay. So this is the first step of the process. The second step is a redevelopment plan, and the third step is the implementation. And the primary focus of the implementation will be the West End Partnership Program.
Okay. And that's when, and that's the point of time when the people who are interested in the loans will actually get to, or the matching grants.
Yes.
They will actually get to see how they apply and how much they can ask for, and specifically what areas they're allowed to ask for money to help with.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Any other questions or discussions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that was sort of an answer to what I had in, what my question was. In general, what kinds of things will people be able to do with those funds?
The kinds of things that I presented during the status report will be the project categories that staff will be proposing to the council for approval consideration.
So we're talking ADA, we're talking signage, we're talking
Right.
redoing the parking lots, we're talking
Exterior facade
beautification,
improvements,
facade improvements.
landscaping,
Okay.
site and
then-
building enhancements.
Okay, I had missed that. Thank you.
Would you like that incorporated into my presentation on Thursday?
I think that needs to be highlighted a little bit so that if there are folks that want to address this, they've heard, they may be coming here to hear those specific things too.
Okay.
So you
I'll-
need to
I'll-
highlight those, and I think that would be helpful.
I will.
Thank you. Thanks. That's a good idea.
Anybody else? All right, thank you. We'll move on to, thanks, Matt. We'll move on to item 3, elections. Ms. Adams.
Mayor Mueller, members of council. Following the work session 2 weeks ago, this item was taken off the agenda and we reworked the proposed amendments to kind of clean up the language and make it a little easier to understand. Essentially, what the item before you, these amendments propose, is currently on our election cycles, candidates are placed on a primary ballot regardless of how many candidates per office we get. If candidates achieve a level of 50% plus one of the votes following a calculation that the state provides for calculating winners, they are automatically elected through the primary. Candidates, remaining seats and candidates that don't achieve that threshold go on to the general for a runoff. The proposed amendments today are that if in future elections, if we do not have candidates that exceed 2 per open seat. So usually we have 3 council members, so that would be 6. If we have 7 candidates for city council, we would hold a primary to narrow down. However, this proposed ordinance does leave in the provision for direct election through the primary, so we could actually still fill our seats in the primary. Those are the major changes that this amendment is proposing to you, is if in June, when the filing period closes and we have 5 people running for 3 council seats and 2 people running for mayor, we're going to just dispense with the primary and move them on to the general instead of holding a primary, is essentially what this would do.
Yes, ma'am.
I've tried to find as much information as I could on doing this, and I'm still having a little difficulty with it. Were you able to, in your pulling this together and writing, getting this document prepared, able to see a downside for the community in any of the way this is working?
It really depends on who you ask, because there are people that you have more voters in a general election generally than you have in a primary. So voter turnout is a big thing that a lot of people say they don't know that council can be elected in a primary. That, in my opinion, is education. It's not a fault. It's been that way for a long time. That could be educated for the citizens. Holding 2 elections, an election costs $35,000+ every time we do it. So if we were able to skip one every two years, that's $35,000 in a budget that could be put to other projects or needs that the city has. So downside, no. I personally don't see a downside to either one, but I understand both sides of the arguments as far as mostly it's voter. We have a lot of voters who just don't know that city elections can be decided at a primary. That I kind of take as that's my bad. That we should be able to get that out to the voters if that's the case.
So do I understand then that by there being fewer voters who vote in a primary, that's an issue for some people?
That is an issue for some people.
Okay.
Generally, it's up to half fewer voters in a primary. A lot of times primaries are looked at party only, and the state of Arizona has a lot of independents and non-affiliated voters who don't go to the polls for a primary election just because that's not what they do. And so then they go to the general election when they can vote for whomever they want, and they find that the city's already been settled.
I see.
And that
I
can
see.
be disconcerting to a voter. But again, that's an education on our part that possibly we could counteract that problem better than we have in the past.
Thank you.
How would this affect the number of signatures that somebody would need to have to get on the ballot? Is it going to be then based, is it always been based on the general, or has it been based on the primary, because that's where?
The Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Wolf, the signature, all the requirements are based on the last election that a mayor was elected and the number of votes that were cast in that election. So it's not so specific that this would mess that up. Nothing would change in that practice.
So it would not significantly increase the number of signatures that are needed for someone to be on the ballot?
It may because 5% of 3,000 votes at a primary is less than 5% of 6,000 to 8,000 at a general. Yes, so it could increase the candidate requirement for signatures.
But and the thing I would say, that may not necessarily be a bad thing.
No, I agree. I'm
Maybe a lot more work for the candidates, but.
I agree with you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just asking a question.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Any further discussion?
That's it for me.
Okay. Then we'll move on to the next item is under new business. We got the minutes. Any additions, completions, or any additions, corrections for the minutes for October 12th? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 5. Mrs. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The city and Fort Huachuca have a long history of partnerships, including library services, operating joint use airport, and offering refuse and recycling services on Fort Huachuca. The opportunity presented itself to provide ambulance services to the post through a relatively recent change in the United States Code, which allows for military installations to directly enter into intergovernmental service agreements with state and local governments for installation support services. These types of agreements can result in significant savings for the military, which serves the best interests of the Army, particularly in creating efficiency and reducing costs, thereby enhancing overall mission effectiveness and readiness. The city has always stood by to support the fort, however possible, and can take another step toward doing that even more effectively by entering into agreements such as this IGSA before you in order to provide services to the fort that the city is already providing to its own citizens. The IGSA is a one-year agreement to provide ambulance services on Fort Huachuca with 4 successive one-year renewals, or a total of 5 years. The labor and materials costs for ambulance services will be reimbursed to the city on a monthly basis, with the total reimbursement of the first year of contract set at $862,923.56. If future options are granted, they shall be reimbursed at the base year cost plus a 3% escalation throughout the life of the agreement. The city first introduced the subject of an intergovernmental services agreement with Fort Huachuca to provide these services during a strategic planning session in March, and continued to discuss the issue with council throughout the budget work sessions, and the subject was also covered in the executive report in late summer. On October 16th, the city and Fort Huachuca received authorization from the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for installations, housing and partnerships, and the Commanding General for Installation Management Command, or MCOM, to proceed with the IGSA. All intergovernmental agreements must be approved by the governing body, and so it is before you tonight, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Questions for Mrs. Wilson?
Just have one. Under the terms of agreement, I know that it's 1 year with an additional 4 option years that we call them, but I'm reading a line that says the United States shall only be obligated for only 1 year of performance. I don't see anything where it says the city is only obligated for 1 year of
If this
service.
is, if this is signed, we will be obligated to perform in the first year. And then the option years are based on the federal
Would
funding.
could be a mutual decision is what
That
I'm
is
asking.
correct.
I'm just not reading it that way, and I want to make sure that's clear.
You are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know, this is going to be presented to the council for what?
Approval.
Approval.
Do we really need to approve it, or is it a done deal?
The attorney's not sitting here, but that question was asked of the attorney, and he
It
said,
has to
yes,
be approved.
has to be approved by the council.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
You know, I'd just like to say, too, that I totally understand our relationship with Fort Huachuca and the importance of these kind of agreements, particularly for the military to save funds as much as they possibly can. But at the same time, and this is just, I'm saying this is just a matter of comment, I understand that we are vigorously attempting to keep the businesses in our community growing as much as we have as much as we can do that with our businesses, but at the same time bringing in additional commercial businesses to our community as much as we possibly can, so that we won't be or continue to be as dependent on Fort Huachuca as we always have been in the past. I think we've had this conversation before that Fort Huachuca has contributed a great deal, I mean everything, to our community and to the county. But it's not now and never will be a guarantee for our community. And I just want to make the comment that I hope we continue strong and vigorous efforts to build our commercial community, I think that's the word I want to use, commercial, new businesses and vigorous continuing businesses in our community.
And I would just comment, I don't think this contract detracts from our ability to do that. Obviously, we need to spend more time, energy, and focus on diversifying the economy. And I think that's a good point. Anybody else? All right, then we'll move on to, and thanks, Mrs. Wilson. We move on to item 6, which is a reappointment, number of reappointments to the West End Commission. Any comments or questions there? No. Okay, then
I'll just ask too, because we're still working on our commission guidelines. We request every commission to recommend to us these new commissioners or renewing commissioners. Do we have any formal paperwork for that, or do we just accept the applications? Is that how it's done? Do we have a process for that?
we do have a process, but
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Calhoun, candidates submit their application to usually either the commission or the clerk's office. If they send them to us, we send them down to the liaisons and the council liaisons. They generally have gotten in the practice of discussing it as an agenda item at one of their meetings, and then the commissions vote and recommend, and through their submission to us of a resolution, that is their recommendation that the commission would like to put those people forward. So it is kind of formal, but yeah.
Is it, for instance, in the minutes, it would say we
Yes.
recommend, and that could be considered the proof.
Yes, proper minutes would show that the discussion was held, that certain people were recommended for approval, and I don't know that they actually vote on all of them. It all probably depends on how many candidates they have. But yes, there should be some commission action.
Okay. I'm not sure if that's in the in that guidelines, but we'll look back through it and see.
It's set out in the guidelines that you have already approved by resolution.
Yep.
And it's a recommendation only on the commission level. The
okay.
only official vote is the vote that you all take.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll now move on to the presentation by Tony Boone, Colonel retired, on the OEA grant. Tony?
Old habit, huh?
Yeah, bad habits.
That's good because I might slip up here. So, Mr. Mayor, council members, I just wanted to take a couple minutes in a work session for your benefit as well as the community to cover kind of the Office of Economic Adjustment grant. So I've got 5 slides. I know that may disappoint some of you, but really just wanted to hit the highlights kind of as we move along.
Excuse me, Tony, before you get started, I apologize for interrupting you, but could you say a few words about what the Office of Economic Adjustment is?
Yes, ma'am.
Who they are?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and that's kind of why I put this slide up. So really this involves the teamwork and the element that's there. So Office of Economic Adjustment, primary mission and role and where it links into us is to offset some of the military reductions in local communities. So as I mentioned before, in a base realignment and closure process, the OEA is directly involved. So we're tied with the office out of Sacramento, California. And really the basis of this happened before I got here, where the staff wrote the grant request, and it was intended to offset the reductions that Fort Huachuca has seen over the last several years, both directly tied to sequestration and really the things that the Army has changed. So that's kind of the basis of the grants. You also see Jeffrey Donahoe Associates on there. They are linked to the airport study. I'll talk that in a little more detail, but they've got extensive background. And then the recent addition was Sun Corridor for the Sierra Vista Technical Assistance Program. So again, really just an opportunity to speak to you as well as our community. So the overview itself, you can kind of look at the very top. I cut and pasted the exact language that was put in the grant proposal, but it really goes back, and I appreciate the segue by Council Member Calhoun, but it goes back into a more diversified economy. And the key word there is offsetting Sierra Vista's economic dependency on the military spending. As I mentioned earlier, it was written and submitted by staff members that have since left us, but the grant itself was awarded in March of 17. There are 2 elements within the grant. Again, 1 grant, but 2 specific purposes with the airport feasibility study, as well as the technical assistance program. You'll see the numbers, and I know they've been kicked around, so I broke them out at the macro level. Just over $721,000. We do have our own internal cost, which by and large ties into staff time and indirect cost, just a little over $79,000. That really focuses on 4 primary personnel, myself as the program manager, with the expectation I spend roughly 6% of my time was kind of the estimate when we put the proposal in. Mike Klein as the economic development analyst, roughly 16% of his time. Laura Wilson in her former job as procurement manager, which we will move, just to roughly a couple percent or 2% of her time. And then Helen Lee as the grants administrator, roughly 5% of her work time, again, goes into overseeing kind of as we go along.
That's
So
very, very precise.
I was prepared. But within the $641,000 that the federal government, by way of the OEA, within that we've got supplies, some membership, as well as rental that will be rental monies that will be tied to the technical assistance program. And if you're just wondering on the rough order of magnitude, so the airport study in and of itself is a little over $160,000, and the technical assistance program was $279,000. Now, within the airport feasibility study itself, again, the key words are economic diversity, It specifically looks at the city side of Libby Army Airfield, roughly the 9 acres that the city currently owns. And then, of course, the element of collaborative strategies of where can we partner with the fort on improving the economic ability for the city side of the fort to complement the missions of Fort Huachuca. Again, we understand the training missions are the primary focus of Libby Army Airfield, so the strategies that are involved are tied to opportunities that do not impinge on their primary mission. Contracted with Jeff Donahoe and Associates. The business itself was formed in 2004. Jeff Donahoe himself has over 30 years of experience in this line of work. He has worked on 40 BRAC studies for 40 different communities themselves. And he also worked the enhanced use lease effort that Grand Sky, North Dakota pursued. So extensive background. I would like to take credit for selecting him, but that was before I was here. On the milestones, again, it's fairly straightforward. We did have a meeting with the fort. Jeff was here on the 16th and 17th of October. We went to the fort leadership and effectively to ensure that we did not cross a red line or we did not propose a strategy that would be incongruent with the fort's mission. By and large, the meeting was very successful, and I think it's opened some new doors for additional partnership and planning between the city and the fort. You can see Jeff Donahoe and Associates will continue to work. There will be a preliminary draft that will be turned into staff. And then per the grant, the expectation is that it will be turned in and reported by 28 February. I looked forward, and I'm just expecting a typical work session on February 27th. So Jeff Donahoe and Associates will do a public meeting and present their findings as well as the strategy.
Mr. Boone, when is the preliminary draft supposed to be out to the staff?
I don't think the specific grant actually had a precise date. My expectation would be about 45 days before February.
Okay.
So approximately first of the year.
Okay. Will that document be something that council can just read individually on their own before the work session?
Absolutely. I think we could leave it in the reading room so
Right.
that you can take a look. Again, the intent is not to have any surprises.
Yeah.
But the way the grant was built so that we would have a public meeting so the community would see the strategies.
Okay.
So
thank you.
we can accommodate that.
Thank you.
Would it be possible to shed some more light on the tangible results that would come from this? And the reason that I ask is I've spoken about this a couple of times, and I can conceptualize it in my mind, but any further questions into what exactly this might look like or some examples or alternatives, it gets a little tough. But I understand if you can't do that at the
Well,
moment.
I mean, I guess what I would offer is talking to Jeff. My guidance to him was to put everything on the table. Because what I didn't want to do is eliminate a potential course of action just because it's either A, been tried before or thought before. So I wanted to ensure that he looked at the full spectrum of potentials. The precise strategies, they're going to hand us a document that has some potential strategies that we, between the staff and the council, can pursue. We really are going to have that conversation about where do we want to go with the information. Because again, it's a study and it's a report. It's as good as the paper it's written on at that point. We must take action. So there is going to be some additional work come February when we get the study to kind of put the strategies into place and actually, as you put it, have a tangible result kind of as we move along. As far as the spectrum, and I'll leave something out, it could be aviation related. It may not be aviation related. It could be industrial related. It could be other government agencies or other federal agencies that may move into the city side. There's an element, and there's been conversations with the Airport Commission to include our general aviation within the plan itself, so that has been included. But again, it's kind of a fairly wide swath of potential strategies that we, the city, can pursue. Does that help at all? No.
I guess we'll have to wait till the first of the year.
But I understand. I do understand. I think the point that you're trying to get across is that it's a pretty broad spectrum, and we should be open-minded.
Yes, and I also don't want to jump the gun on a potential strategy
Sure.
that may or may not work, or may or may not be feasible within the community.
That makes sense.
Okay. Any more questions on the airport?
On the, I'll wait till you're finished. I
Okay.
have a backwards question.
Sure.
I'm gonna go back.
Okay, so on the second element of the grant, the technical assistance program, the target is small to medium-sized businesses. Within the grant document itself, it did not define that. So we've got some latitude within our small and mid-size. You'll notice in parents, we talked about 25. Again, from the grant proposal, that was a target set, so there's no specific numbers. So I don't have a bar that says you must have 25 or you must have 24. But again, it goes back to diversification, and it looks to take things that are defense-related or technology that's defense-related. And the language specifically also looked at commercial businesses that were prepared or had the ability to scale up. So in short, we're looking with our partners to effectively change the trajectory of the business. If the business has been, held at a 1% growth rate, what can we put into the business to change the growth potential or trajectory, or within the diversification? So contracted with Sun Corridor at the end of September 2017. If you haven't or you're not familiar with Sun Corridor, I encourage you to hit their website. But effectively, they were formerly Trio, which was tied to Tucson. They've changed their name to Sun Corridor. Done significant work in Pima, Pinal, Cochise, and they're expanding into the northern states of Mexico. They include CEOs of businesses, presidents of university, so it's a wide group of individuals. The milestones are a little broader and a little longer on this one as compared to the airport study. As you look, just for instance, in launch service programs, the intent was, as it was built, was March of June of 17. You'll notice in parens that are underlined. What we have done as staff, because it has taken us a little while, quite frankly, with staff changeover, the process of selection. If we have this 6-month no-cost extension, which we were working with Office of Economic Adjustment, then you're looking at December of 17 for that window. So it gives us a little more flexibility to work with Sun Corridor to move out. Operations then themselves would run through December of 17. When we talk sustainability and strategic partnerships, again, that brings in the technical assistance to the business owner, and that would be early, would push it out to August of 19 with the 6-month extension. Their program evaluation involves the lessons learned. What did we learn from the process? How do we do this again? Potentially, how can we make it better? So that's kind of their final proposal. The difference between the airport study, which is purely a study, so they will hand it to us, really the tangible piece is the impact to our local businesses. And that's the expectation, whether we see it in February of 19 or it gets extended to August of 2019. Within the clients, the way the grant was written, and again, I'm using the language as it was written because I know there's been some questions. There were 2 elements. The leap ahead was any business that had been effectively been in business longer than a year, and the jumpstart was roughly 6 months. Again, there's no hard and fast rules there, nor are there any requirements to put 50% in leap ahead and 50% in jumpstart. So we've got some flexibility there. So I wouldn't get too hung up on either the time or the specific names that we've called them.
Tony, before you go to your next slide, under milestones, you got the program evaluation. We're evaluating for the purposes of what is the question? Are we evaluating it so that we can determine whether we're going to fund it? We're going to fund it for the next 2 years or 3 years, or drop it? Or are we evaluating something else?
Mr. Mayor, I would say we're evaluating whether we learn. I think it's from us, from the staff's perspective, what do we learn? Again, if we're looking, again, the funding runs out, the program is there. So the benefit to the businesses that we've learned, do we seek other additional funding to continue a similar type program that goes forward?
And I understand the federal money would run out in August of 19 if we get extended. But my point is to you is going to be is really we need to make that evaluation earlier than the day the money runs out, because if in fact 6 months earlier or a year earlier, it looks like it's a profitable thing. That's something we have to discuss on the council so that we can then fund or decide to fund or not fund the program as may be appropriate. So,
No, I understand, Mr. Mayor,
Okay.
absolutely. And we've actually talked to Sun Corridor without getting too ahead of it to talk about what is the follow-on.
Yeah.
I mean, but we've got to start considering that
no,
now.
but I was going to say we can't wait till December 19 to make that. We up here can't wait till 19 December to make that decision. We have to figure that out earlier.
Correct. We need to be earlier in the budget cycle if we need to
It's tough
include that.
if you've only been running a year and a half to
Correct.
evaluate it.
Understood. All right, so my last slide goes into kind of just additional information. Again, the client selection process will be a joint effort between really the economic development staff from the city and Sun Corridor. Sun Corridor has committed Steve Egan, the former CFO of Raytheon, as kind of their project lead. He's been down here a couple times, so extensive knowledge in business. They've taken a further step, and Sun Corridor themselves and Joe Snell, the president, have committed one of their staff members, Michael Guyman, who is currently their director of marketing, to handle this project. So I saw Michael last week. So they've committed a significant. Again, they have 8 permanent staff members, so they've committed one of 8 to assist us in this process. I put the formal application process. We're still working through that. Based on my learning experience, the phone number to our office is there. 439-2212 for businesses that have questions or that would like to call us. We've had about 5 different phone calls thus far, and we are partnering with Sun Corridor and other partners in the community for a kickoff in November. And the intent is to be able to hand out the information, put it out in enough time with marketing so that interested business owners can come here, meet, and see, and we can start the process. We can start the process for the application. Under client businesses or support to the businesses, I put in some of the topic areas that Sun Corridor brings, but really it comes across broad education, training, and mentorship specific to each of the business requirements and business owners. As we will find, the business owners are in different places, both personally, professionally, and their business is a different place in time, whether it's a nascent business or something that's been moving for a couple different years. Our immediate next steps are to assist with the office or training space, our marketing campaign, and really the community awareness, which really this meeting allows me to kind of move this off. And at this point, I would encourage any of the businesses to give us a call. We will add them, and we will consider them as we move forward as we go. So pending that, I've questions?
You talked about the businesses, and I don't know if there are any restrictions in the grant. Do they have to physically be located within the city limits? Are we talking the general or the greater Sierra Vista area for the businesses?
Mr. Mayor, the grant itself gives us the greater Sierra Vista area.
Okay, good. Yes, ma'am. You had a question.
The assisting with office training space, who is that for?
Well, Councilmember Calhoun,
Businesses that?
correct. So if you were the customer, the intent is
okay.
between Sun Corridor to have you a physical space with computers. We have a video teleconference requirement so that we can bring in people, whether they're in Tucson, Phoenix, or other, so they can bring the education directly to them, so we don't have to physically move people here. And then we've got, I'm going to say it's 2 or 3 computers. Again, if they need additional internet access, research capability, really that's what the office space is for. And then the second element would be education. So, for instance, maybe we would schedule and have a marketing class on Thursday night, because we've talked about it. I mean, if the business owner is running their business during, kind of the normal time, may have to do things at night. So maybe we offer a marketing class on Thursday night, bring additional speakers and or VTC them in. So that's kind of the physical space that we're looking to put Sun Corridor.
To put Sun Corridor.
Correct.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Got it. I
Sun
understand.
Corridor in the auspices of the Sierra Vista Technical Assistance, the SV TAP will be, that's that location.
Okay, I understand now. I thought I misunderstood that it was businesses you were going to put in spaces in it. My question has nothing to do with all of the things that you've explained to us, and it sounds like we're fully into this. I have a question, though, that goes back in time to how we made the decision. And Tony, you probably you weren't here for this, but how did we make the decision that the airport would be the place that we would use our OEA funding?
Well, that's only part of it.
Correct.
And the thing is, the city does own land out there.
Right?
That was one of the factors.
Okay.
It's underutilized. That's another factor.
The airport.
So airport. I'm talking we have unused actual acres, not just the airport
Okay.
terminal.
Mm-hmm.
But we actually have facilities out there.
Mm-hmm.
And that looked like a good place to start for part of this. And the airport study is just a small part. What's the breakdown in cash, Tony? Do you remember?
Mr. Mayor, the airport study is 160,000 of the 641. So
yeah, 641. So it's only a piece of the property, but
This is the other piece.
Yeah, this is the other piece,
Mm-hmm.
the more costly piece.
Okay. That question's been put to me, and I quite honestly didn't remember that what process we went through and what things we talked about doing and rejected and chose the airport. And we can talk about that another time, but I quite honestly don't remember. Did the council make that decision, or was that a...
That came as a recommendation from staff before we applied for the grant.
And then we did approve.
Well, we approved the application for the grant.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm still a little confused based on these slides as to what exactly this is giving us that isn't already in the community between the SBDC, this Chamber of Commerce, Arizona Workforce, and all of those items. Especially, I mean, you're talking about marketing classes. Those are items that's already offered in our community.
correct. No, again, it may not be something new and unique. So the way the grant was written, the intent was to provide a technical assistance program. So if I use the SBDC, we may look at using or dealing with a client business that visited the SBDC a year ago or 2 years ago. Now it is a mid-size, well, mid-size in the grand scheme of things. It has 2 years or 3 years under its belt, and it's looking to do something different. So the intent of the grant was to go out and find a partner to bring in additional resources. Venture capitalists aren't included generally in an SBDC kind of environment. IT support, legal support. So again, we're offering additional resources within the grant to those businesses. Sunquarter offers a great opportunity to tap into a large group of directors, businesses, and the people that they've committed in their proposal offer a pretty significant resume for each of their own lines of effort. So I wouldn't say it's supplanting anything. I would say it is more of a additional complementary resource. We have talked to the chamber to include them, the chambers, to include them as a potential partner as we move forward. There's also the element of education. So we're exploring those options too, and that was included in the grant. So again, I don't think it's replacing anything, and the intent is not to over-duplicate, because again, you've got quite a few other programs, but is really to complement the current great work that's already going on in the community.
Tony, you mentioned venture capitalists. Are they part of the response that Sunquarter mentioned, that there would be perhaps opportunity for existing businesses to tap into that?
I guess I would say it's implied. I can't guarantee that a venture capitalist would expose or put their own personal money in this proposition, but they did offer up access to venture capitalists to have the conversation about financing and say you need to do an expansion on your business. Mm-hmm. So again, that would be a level of expertise that they would offer a business to have a discussion. Again, there's no commitment as far as money. It really does come back to advice and recommendations.
Yeah, but that's pretty good for, to be able to bring significant, yes, thank you, to bring that into, available to some of our businesses. Is there a balance between the contractor-type businesses that are already associated with DOD or U.S. Army, and other types of, I know you had that listed out, the types of businesses. Will there be some balance there that all of the businesses wouldn't be those that are directly related to defense contracting and others that are more a part of everyday life in the community?
I think the answer would be yes. It's hard to tell until I see the businesses that have put forward their applications. The intent was to take a business that has, I don't hate to use the word contract, but say 15% or more is the way the grant talks about, that their current customer is a Department of Defense. So the intent would be, where can we help them broaden their customer base, either to other government agencies, the state, the city, or do they go to a full commercialization of their service? So again, it's trying to balance out, but it does give us some flexibility. And again, I think the grant, the lack of specificity in the grant gives us enough flexibility to meet the spirit and the intent. But there is a defense base and there is a technology element that is clearly in the grant. So to me, it's the application of technology. So perhaps not recreating or creating new technology, but if you are using technology in new and unique ways, I think you would more than benefit from this program.
Okay, one more. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One more. I may have missed it in your presentation. How are businesses knowing that this is available to them?
Well,
how are they getting the word?
Well, the initial piece was the press release. So we were working with Sun Corridor to get the specific date and time for the release. And then we're going to join with our partners in the community. Again, that's where the chambers come in, as well as Judy and our own marketing team to be able to put the message out with the intent of, if you're interested, please come. What I would offer is either if a constituency or a business would approach you, please direct them to us. We're collecting phone numbers and names now to be able to hand to Sun Corridor of those interested. I think we've had 5 phone calls. 2 were comfortable enough to leave us their name and number. The other 3 were just kind of generally asking questions. But again, if people call the Economic Development Office, we will take their information now, and that way we will ensure to reach out to them with the application when we kick this off in November.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
What page is this? For the Sierra Vista Technical Assistance Program, under the first bullet, purpose, it says 25 plus small to mid-sized companies. Is that a goal or is that a requirement?
Councilmember Ash, I would say that is a goal. Okay. There's actually a window in there. And again, that's what I said. There's some very interesting specifics in the grant or the grant request, and then there's some other that give us latitude because they were written broadly. So it was roughly 25 to 35, if I remember the second number. I didn't want to scare anyone that says, hey, yea, verily, you must have 25. Again, it was a target that was kind of written in the grant proposal many, many, many months ago as we go along. So we do have a little bit of latitude. At the end of the day, if we find 15 or 20 viable businesses that are financially, economically different in 18 months, I will count as a success. You know, if it's 24, not 25, and they're still going. And there is language in the grant that understands we may lose some of them as they go along. So there is some expectation that some businesses may start the program, but they may not complete the program. So there's understanding that may happen.
That's all I got.
Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody good? Any concluding remarks there, Tony?
No, Mr. Mayor, council member, thank you. And again, if you see businesses or if you're in the community, please direct them to us and we'll get them queued up at the very beginning. But other than that, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. The next item on the agenda is a discussion of the council executive report. And I thought that this was going to be taken off until Chuck was back. Until that was my discussion with Chuck. I guess he didn't tell the clerk to take it off before, so he was going to do this on preparation for the November meeting. What I'd like to do is, if you have something hot that you don't need to address specifically to the to the city manager, and if the I don't want to say guilty party, but if the responsible party is in the room, if you have something you want to direct to that individual, I would recommend we do that rather than go through the whole report and we'll reschedule. So does anybody have any comments on the executive report that they have to have done today?
Nothing.
No,
I
not if
can't
it's going to be
wait.
rescheduled.
Okay.
I would make one comment. You know I will. Judy, I just want
Well,
to.
that's what I was waiting for.
Yeah. I just think it's great that we've made another publication as Sierra Vista being a great place to retire. I don't know if we go out and solicit that kind of, what do you call it? Appointment from somebody, or if they just find us and look at us and decide these people deserve this. Can you elaborate just a little bit?
Well, it's
on
a
that?
little of both. I do work with travel writers to get them to come here and write a story about us, but in this particular case of Where to Retire, they were ready to do a Sierra Vista story again. And the chief was instrumental in helping us locate some folks who had retired here to tell their story.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think every time we're mentioned, it's a good thing for us. And one word leads to another. People talk to each other, and it's a good thing for Sierra Vista. I still recognize and want to say publicly that I don't believe we can be identified as a retirement community because we seem to have a fairly decent balance of age groups, but it's still nice to be recognized by this particular group. Thank you.
Okay, we ready to move on to item D, which is report of recent trips, meetings, and future meetings. And I guess I'll say that not Friday this week, Friday next week, I'll be going up to Phoenix for the League of Cities and Towns Executive Board meeting. But that's the only trip I've got on the horizon.
And don't we have a meeting with our state legislators coming soon?
Yeah,
November 6th.
November 6th, that we have a meeting with state legislators.
Is
All
anybody
three of them.
Yeah, that's what's scheduled now.
Is anybody going to a National League of Cities in November?
No.
Nobody? Huh. Well, I guess I might have. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going this year.
Yeah. And we'll move on to board and commission liaison updates. Issues with boards and commissions.
Nope. Things are quiet.
Well, I just mentioned that on Saturday I went out to, what's the park? Timothy Lane Park, and good public input, good public suggestions. And I'm sure the Parks and Rec Commission more than happy to take that ball and run with it. So.
Someone mentioned the IDA wanting to do a work session on outside state bonding.
On what?
On the outside state of the state bonding.
No, not yet. They're not prepared
They're
yet.
not ready for that.
There is the city council is having coffee with the council at Broxton Coffee Friday. Yes?
Oh, I'm sure you guys are.
Yeah. Well, I'll be in Phoenix for another thing.
Well, I'm going to go where there's coffee,
Sorry.
so. Well, if anything major comes up, I'll be sure and
All right.
let everybody
We
know.
appreciate that. Okay, board and commission liaison updates. I don't see anything. Future discussion items and council requests. Yes, ma'am.
I would ask that we get the possibility of chickens on the work session for Sierra Vista.
We're going to have chicken at a work session?
That would be fantastic,
What?
but they'd be
Fried
live.
chicken.
They'd be
Fried-
live.
Oh, man.
They'd run around.
Yeah.
I would prefer
When-
we not have
It'll be
live
next month.
chickens running around the council
On the
room,
7th?
please.
Okay.
Okay. So
Thank you,
it-
ma'am.
Okay.
It's
All
already
right.
on there. Okay.
All right. Anything else?
I thought that was happening today.
Were you excited for little chickens?
We brought
Like some
beef.
scrambled or deep fried, which,
Oh, I've
Okay.
named them all. You can't eat them.
well, that's why you name your chickens Kiev and fricassee and yeah. Okay. Saying nothing else before council, besides bad jokes, meeting's adjourned.
That was good.